Project Management Professional Training Session 4. Initiating the Project. PMP Exam Objectives. What it really means. 1.2 Identify key deliverables based on the business requirements. Identify key deliverables based on the business requirements. This will help to manage customer expectations and gear efforts toward achieving project goals. Pay attention to how the project charter is developed. 1.3 Perform stakeholder analysis. Understand how to identify both the negative and positive stakeholders. You must know the key stakeholders in any project, such as the project manager, sponsor, and project team members. It is important to use appropriate tools and techniques to properly align the stakeholders' expectations with the project in order to gain their support. 1.4 Identify high-level risks, assumptions, and constraints. Identify high-level assumptions, constraints, and risks coming from the current environment, organizational factors, historical data, and expert judgment in order to propose an implementation strategy. Pay attention to this aspect when studying how to develop the project charter. 1.5 Develop the project charter. Understand the develop project charter process. You must know the details of the process, for example, how to develop the project charter by compiling and analyzing gathered information in order to ensure project stakeholders are in agreement on its elements. PMP Exam Objectives. What it really means. 1.6 Obtain project charter approval. Understand that the project charter approval process depends upon the project and the performing organization. By default, the approval is obtained from the project sponsor. The approval is also necessary to get formal authority assigned to the project manager and general project acceptance and commitment. You must know that the project charter approval officially starts a project. 1.8 Inform stakeholders of the approved project charter. Understand that informing stakeholders of the approved project charter is essential to ensuring common understanding among the key stakeholders about the project milestones and their roles and responsibilities. As you learned in the previous chapters, you manage projects through processes. You also learned that a process is composed of input, tools and techniques, and output. You use the tools and techniques on the input of a process to generate its output. Also, recall that processes belong to 5 process groups and 10 knowledge areas. You manage the initiation of a project through a process group called the initiating process group, which consists of 2 processes: develop project charter and identify stakeholders. Before you can initiate a project, it must originate from somewhere, which we discussed in Chapter 1.so. The central question in this chapter is, how is a project initiated? In search of the answer, you will explore 3 avenues with me: developing the project charter, identifying stakeholders, and formally starting the project while informing and involving the stakeholders. Initiating a project. Big picture. Initiating a project means defining the project such that it is in alignment with the organization's strategic objectives on one hand and with prospective stakeholders' needs on the other, getting approval to start it, identifying and analyzing project stakeholders, and starting the project while informing and involving the stakeholders. In Chapter 1, you learned how projects originate from the project initiation context aligned with organization's strategic objectives. Recall, initiation context refers to the situations faced by the organization, such as business/legal requirements, stakeholder requests or needs, need to implement changing business or technological strategies, and need to create, improve, or fix products, processes, or services. In Chapter 2, you saw how this context triggers the process of creating 2 project management business documents: Project Business Case and Project Benefit Management Plan. It's a good policy to involve customers and other important stakeholders in the initiating stage of the project. It would give them the feeling of shared ownership that will greatly contribute to the success of the project by positively influencing factors such as deliverable acceptance and stakeholder satisfaction. As shown in the big picture of initiating a project presented in Figure 3.1, these 2 business documents are the major input into the develop project charter process that generates the project charter, which in turn is an input into the identify stakeholder process. The project charter basically contains a project definition in the form of high-level information about the project. The project is run for stakeholders and by stakeholders, and therefore is aligned with stakeholders' expectations. In that sense, as shown in Figure 3.1, the project charter acts as the interface between the project and the organization's strategic objectives. Figure 3.1. Illustration of the relationship among the major building blocks of the big picture of initiating a project. Note if your project is divided into different phases, you will be going through the initiation stage at the beginning of each phase to check if the decisions and plans made during the initiation of the project are still relevant to the phase at hand. It helps to ensure the project is still focused on the business need for which it was started. The first process in the initiating process group is the Develop Project Charter. Developing a project charter. The project charter is a document that contains high-level project information, such as the project's purpose, objectives, and pre-approved financial resources. The single most important purpose of this document is to convey the formal authorization for the project. To accomplish this, it is necessary that the charter clearly shows the business need for the project and that the project objectives align with the organization's strategic objectives. For this purpose, two project management business documents, i.e., the project business case and the project benefit management plan, are produced, as discussed in Chapter 2. Both of these documents are input to the Develop Project Charter process, as shown in Table 3.1, which also shows the other input items, along with the tools and techniques applied to the input to produce the listed output, project charter and assumptions log. Note the project charter is the document that formally authorizes a project, which includes naming the project manager, determining the authority level of the project manager, and allowing the project manager to start using organizational resources on the project. Table 3.1 presents the Develop Project Charter process in terms of input, tools and techniques, and output. The other input items for the process of developing a project charter are discussed in the following paragraphs. Tip: the business case document is developed from the project initiation context, i.e., the organization's business need, and is used to justify the investment in the project and to draw boundaries around the project, such as what is and is not included. Agreements. When a project is to be executed for a customer who is external to the performing organization, it is usually done based on a contract. The contract may provide key information required for the charter, such as customer-side stakeholders and payment terms. However, in addition to the contract, agreement may also come in other forms, such as verbal agreements, email, letters of intent, service-level agreements, SLAs, and memorandums of understanding, MOUs. We will explore agreements further when we cover the procurement management knowledge area, enterprise environmental factors. During the development of the project charter, you must consider the performing organization's environmental factors relevant to this task, which include the following: government and industry standards, such as legal requirements, product standards, and quality standards relevant to the project, used in determining the project requirements, and so on. Regulatory and legal requirements and constraints can influence the product requirements. Table 3.1. The Develop Project Charter process: input, tools and techniques, and output. Input, tools and techniques. Output. 1. Business documents. Business case, benefit management plan. 2. Agreements. 3. Enterprise environmental factors. 4. Organizational process assets. 1. Data gathering. Brainstorming, focus groups, interviews. 2. Interpersonal and team skills. Conflict management, facilitation, meeting management. 3. Expert judgment. 4. Meetings. 1. Project charter. 2. Assumptions log. Organization's culture and political climate can influence how to process and channel the project charter and getting resources pre-approved. Marketplace conditions may influence milestone schedule and requirements. Organizational structure and governance framework may influence the project manager's assigned responsibility and authority levels and the decision on who will authorize the project. Stakeholders' expectations of their risk threshold can influence several elements of a charter, such as product requirements, milestone schedule, overall project risk, project objectives, and success criteria. Note that the environmental factors can be internal to the performing organization, such as the organization's culture, or external to the organization, such as market conditions. Organizational process assets. As you learned in Chapter 2, the organizational process assets are typically grouped into two categories: processes and procedures for conducting work, and a corporate knowledge base for storing and retrieving information to help the project and its processes. For example, the performing organization might have its own guidelines, policies, and procedures, whose effect on the project must be considered while developing the project charter and the other project documents that will follow. Another example of an organization's process assets are the knowledge and learning base acquired from previous projects. Here are some specific examples of organizational process assets that can be useful in developing the project charter. Templates to support some project management tasks, such as project charter templates. Standard policies and procedures of the organization relevant to developing the project charter. Procedures for issuing work authorizations. Knowledge base of the organization that contains historical information from previous projects, such as project selection decisions and project performance. To summarize, the input items to developing the project charter may include 2 business documents, the project business case and project benefit management plan, enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets, and possibly a contract or some other form of agreement. You then take the available input and apply the relevant tools and techniques to develop the project charter. Tools and techniques to develop project charter. Expert judgment, data gathering, meetings, and interpersonal and team skills are the tools and techniques used to develop the project charter, as described in the following paragraphs. Expert judgment as a tool is discussed in Chapter 2. To develop a project charter, expert judgment may be sought in the relevant area, such as organization strategy to ensure the project aligns with the strategy, benefit management, duration estimation for milestone schedule, budget estimation, risk identification to assess high-level overall project risk, and the field of the project. Data gathering, to collect data in the process of developing a project charter, data gathering techniques, such as interviews, focus groups, and brainstorming, can be used. Interviews can be conducted in a formal or informal setting to obtain information from experts or stakeholders on any appropriate topic, such as stakeholder expectations, product requirements, project risk estimation, and project constraints. You can bring together an appropriate set of stakeholders and experts on any relevant topic, such as project success criteria and risk identification. This is a form of focus group. Furthermore, in the process of using this information to produce a project charter, you can use brainstorming if you get stuck or just to make sound decisions. The brainstorming technique is generally used in a group environment to gather ideas as candidates for a solution to a problem or issue without any immediate evaluation of these ideas. The evaluation and analysis of these ideas happens later. Caution: in interviews, trust and proper confidentiality are essential to create an environment of honesty and thereby collect unbiased data. Meetings: we have already mentioned this tool. This is a very general tool and can be used when appropriate to collect or discuss information on any topic, such as project objectives, success criteria, high-level project and product requirements, and list of milestones. Interpersonal and team skills. Interpersonal and team skills are an important part of the leadership skills expected from a project manager, as discussed in Chapter 2. These skills, such as meeting management facilitation and conflict management, can be used to develop the project charter. Some of the good meeting management practices include 1. Run the meeting with an agenda. 2. Send timely invitations to appropriate stakeholders. 3. Prepare for the meeting. 4. Make sure that meeting minutes are being taken. And 5. Follow up the meeting with minutes and action items from the meeting. The facilitation skill can be used in a meeting or in any group situation, including online, to effectively guide a group to a successful conclusion, such as a decision or resolution to an issue, by encouraging effective participation, considering all contributions, and developing mutual understanding. To develop mutual understanding, sometimes conflict resolution skills are warranted. Example, to get stakeholders to agree on project charter aspects like project objectives, product requirements, milestones, and project success criteria. You apply these tools and techniques to input to produce the output of the develop project charter process. Output of develop project charter. The output of the develop project charter process contains 2 items, the assumptions log and project charter, as described in the following paragraphs. Assumptions log. This item contains assumptions and constraints mostly at the strategic and operational level. They are usually recorded in the business case document and can also come from expert judgment. When the project starts, the assumptions log grows as lower-level assumptions are made due to a lack of details that affect the cost estimate, schedule, plans, and so forth. Assumptions are important as they give rise to risks. An assumption is a factor that you consider to be true without any proof or verification. For example, an obvious assumption that you might make during planning for an in-house project could be the availability of the required skill set to perform the project. It's important to document assumptions clearly and validate them at various stages of the project because assumptions carry a certain degree of uncertainty with them, and uncertainty means risk. Assumptions can appear in both the input and the output of various processes. A constraint is a restriction, or a limitation, that can affect the performance of the project. It can appear in both the input and the output of various processes. For example, there could be a schedule constraint that the project must be completed by a predetermined date. Similarly, a cost constraint would limit the budget available for the project. Project Charter. It is a high-level document that summarizes information about the project and its intended outcome. A careful reader may already know what is in it by now, because we have been mentioning the items in it directly or indirectly. Anyhow, here they are. The project purpose and justification, which includes the purpose of the project and high-level project justification, including business need for the project and return on investment. High-level project description, including key deliverables, and scope, i.e., boundaries around the project. High-level project requirements, example, based on the needs of the customer, the sponsor, and other stakeholders. Project objectives and success criteria. It explains what exactly will be accomplished to meet the purpose, that is, what will be the outcome of the project. Each objective should be measurable and have a success criterion assigned to it. High-level risks. This is overall high-level project risk. The lower-level risks will be identified during the project planning. Milestone schedule. The charter should include a high-level schedule, such as a milestone schedule. A budget summary. A high-level summary of the project budget, that is, how much money is required and at what times during the project. Project manager. Assign a project manager with specified responsibility and authority level. Project sponsor. The name and authority level of the project sponsor authorizing the project charter. Project exit criteria. This states the conditions that have to be met before closing or canceling the entire project or project phase. Project approval and acceptance requirements. This item answers the following questions. What are the name and responsibility of the person or committee that will approve and accept the project when it's finished? What constitutes project success? Who decides whether the project is successful? Who signs off on the project completion? Depending on the project and the organization, the charter may include other elements as well, such as a budget summary, a list of participating functional departments of the organization, and their roles in the project. Caution. The project charter of a project provides the interface between the project and the organization's strategic objectives. As previously stated, the project charter provides the project manager with the authority to use organizational resources to run the project. Remember that, formally speaking, project charters are prepared external to project management by an individual, a committee in the organization, or the PMO. In other words, project management starts where the project charter ends. However, practically, the would-be project manager might actually be involved in writing the project charter or a part of it. The project approval and funding will still be external to the project management boundaries. Note: usually the develop project charter process is performed only once or at predetermined points in the project. Example, for a project that includes multiple phases, it may be performed at the beginning of each phase to validate the assumptions made during the previous phases. Study checkpoint 3.1. Q1. True or false, it is the responsibility of the project manager to develop the project charter. Q2. True or false, project charter is a contract between the performing entity and the entity for which it's being performed. Q3. Which process project document interfaces the project with the organization's strategy? The project charter is not a contract, no money is involved. Caution. It's important to realize that approval and funding of a project occur outside the boundaries of the project. However, the project management team may help and be involved in writing the project charter, and the project manager may even be asked to get involved in developing the business case. Once you have the project charter, you know the high-level product requirements that the project will satisfy. However, a high-level requirement written in a certain way might mean different things to different stakeholders. So, after you get the project charter, one of your next tasks will be to develop a common understanding of the project among the project stakeholders. You accomplish this by drawing or explaining boundaries around the project at a lower level, that is, what is included and what is not, thereby spelling out what exactly the deliverables are. By doing this, you are determining the scope of the project at a lower level, i.e., in detail. That will be discussed in the next chapters, the first chapters of Part 2 of this book. The first project stakeholder is the person who conceived the project. The people who develop and authorize the project charter are also project stakeholders. Thus, developing a project charter is very closely connected to stakeholder management, which contains the Identify Stakeholders process. Identifying the project stakeholders. As mentioned in Chapter 1 and explained in Chapter 2, project stakeholders are individuals and organizations whose interests are affected, positively or negatively, by the project's execution and completion and/or who can influence or impact the project. In other words, a project stakeholder has something to gain from the project or something to lose to the project. Accordingly, stakeholders fall into two broad categories: positive stakeholders, who will normally benefit from the success of the project, and negative stakeholders, who see some kind of disadvantage coming from the project. The implications obviously are that the positive stakeholders would like to see the project succeed, and the negative stakeholders' interests would be better served if the project were delayed or cancelled altogether. For example, your city mayor might be a positive stakeholder in a project to open a Walmart store in your neighborhood because it brings business to the city, whereas some local business leaders might look at it as a threat to local businesses and thereby may act as negative stakeholders. Negative stakeholders are often overlooked by the project manager and the project team, which increases the project risk. Ignoring either positive or negative project stakeholders will have a damaging impact on the project. Therefore, it's important that you, as a project manager, start identifying the project stakeholders early on in the project. The different project stakeholders might have different and conflicting expectations that you need to analyze and manage. Identifying all the project stakeholders might be a difficult task, but the obvious ones include the project manager, program manager, portfolio manager, customers and users, project sponsor, project management office, project team, operations management, sellers and business partners, and functional managers related to the project. In addition to these key stakeholders, discussed in Chapter 2, there can be a number of other less obvious stakeholders both inside and outside of your organization. Depending upon the project, these might include investors, sellers, contractors, family members of the project team members, government agencies, media outlets, lobbying organizations, individual citizens, and society at large. It is critical for the success of the project that you identify positive and negative stakeholders early on in the project, understand and analyze their varying and conflicting expectations, and manage those expectations throughout the project. Table 3.1 presents the Identify Stakeholders process in terms of the input, tools and techniques, and output. Identifying stakeholders includes the following. Identify individuals and organizations that can influence the project and/or be impacted by the project. Document relevant information about the individuals and organizations and about their interests and involvement in the project, etc. Document how these individuals and organizations can influence the project and how they can be impacted by the project. Determine the levels of importance of these stakeholders. Note as the input items in Table 3.2 indicate, project planning should and does start early in the project. The uncovered planning items in this table will be covered in Part II. As mentioned earlier, stakeholder identification is necessary in order to manage both stakeholder expectations and their influence on the project. They can influence various aspects of the project, such as definition, changes, execution, deliverables, and ultimately the success. They may come from inside the organization with different levels of authority or from outside the organization. Identifying stakeholders is an iterative process, that is, you might have to perform the identification over and over again because some old stakeholders may become irrelevant, and some new stakeholders may appear during the life of the project. Because identifying and analyzing the stakeholders and managing their expectations and influence is so critical to the success of the project, you should start this task early on in the project. To identify the stakeholders, we gather, analyze, and then present data or information about the stakeholders. Gathering data. You can start by collecting information about stakeholders from the input items listed in Table 3.2. The project charter. The project charter helps greatly to identify key stakeholders with responsibilities by revealing the internal and external individuals and groups who are either directly involved in the project or potentially will be impacted by it. The project sponsor, customers, and departments of the performing organization participating in the project are some examples of stakeholders identified by the project charter. Business documents. The business case document reveals the project. objectives and the initial list of related stakeholders. From the benefit management plan, you can extract information about stakeholders who would benefit from the project's outcome. Project management plan. As stakeholder management is closely coupled with communication management, you can extract considerable information about project stakeholders from the communication management plan. Also, from the stakeholder engagement plan, if it contains information about stakeholders. Both plans will be discussed in the next part of this book. Project documents. The change log and issues log may reveal new stakeholders or changed project relationship with an existing stakeholder. Also, from the requirement documentation you can extract or derive stakeholder information. Procurement documents. If the project originated from procurement activity, then the procurement documents, such as the contract, will be useful to help identify the stakeholders. If this project is going to use procurement to produce part of its product, then the procurement documents will help to identify some stakeholders, such as sellers and suppliers. Advanced data gathering. In conjunction with and in addition to simple information and data collection from input items, we can use some data gathering techniques to identify new stakeholders and also to get more information about already identified stakeholders. These techniques include questionnaires and surveys and brainstorming. You can also use document analysis techniques for this purpose. These techniques will be discussed in more detail in Chapter 4. Once the data about stakeholders is collected, it needs to be analyzed to extract the useful information from it, which will then need to be appropriately presented. Stakeholder data analysis. Stakeholder analysis is an activity to analyze data about the stakeholders to extract useful and relevant information. The following are the 3 major steps. 1. Identify. Identify all potential stakeholders and the important characteristics of each identified stakeholder, such as the following. A. Name, department, and role. For example, Dr. John Sari, Vice President, Research and Development. B. Interest in the project. Why should the stakeholder be interested in the project? Is the stakeholder seeking to benefit or is the stakeholder threatened? C. Rights, ownership, contribution. What are the legal and moral rights of the stakeholder, ownership of assets, etc., and how much can the stakeholder contribute to the project? D. Knowledge level. What is the knowledge level of the stakeholder, especially about the project and in the application area of the project? In other words, how much can the stakeholder's knowledge help or hurt the project? E. Expectations. What are the stakeholders' needs and expectations of the project? F. Kind and level of influence. In which way and how much can the stakeholder influence the project to impact its outcome? 2. Assess. Make an assessment of how a stakeholder is going to react to various situations in the project. This will help in your preparation to influence them in order to get their support to enhance the chances of project success. With this information at hand, we can classify, i.e., categorize, the stakeholders by using data presentation techniques that will help you in building appropriate relationships with the stakeholders. Data presentation. An example of a data presentation technique is mapping stakeholders in a way that categorizes them using various criterion. When there are so many stakeholders, it's important for effective stakeholder management to classify and prioritize them. This will help make efficient use of management efforts, including communication and expectations management, and also will help build appropriate relationships with stakeholders. For example, an obvious classification is positive and negative stakeholders. For more sophisticated classifications, there are several criteria and models, including the following. Direction of influence. This model classifies stakeholders according to the magnitude and direction of their influence. Upward, for whom the project is, example, project sponsor, customer organization, and senior management or performing organization. Downward, project team or other people working for the project on a temporary basis, such as knowledge or skill specialists. Outward, stakeholders outside the project team, example end users, suppliers, and regulators. Sideward, other project managers of middle management in competition with this project, example for resources. Power/interest grid. In this model, you place the stakeholders on a two-dimensional plot, power, i.e. authority, level versus interest level. For example, if a powerful stakeholder has a lot of interest in the project, he is of great priority. If, on the other hand, a stakeholder lacks interest in the project, then he potentially is not going to influence the project that much, even if he has a lot of authority. Power/influence grid. This model plots the stakeholders in a two-dimensional space, authority level versus ability to influence the project. Influence/impact. This model plots the stakeholders in a two-dimensional space, ability to influence the project versus ability to cause changes in the project planning, execution, and hence in the final outcome. For example, a project stakeholder may be highly involved, high influence, in the project but have no ability to impact the project, such as influencing changes in the project. In that case, this stakeholder is of lower priority than the stakeholder who has high involvement and high impact. Stakeholder cube. This model plots the stakeholders in a three-dimensional space, example, influence, impact, and interest. Salience model. This model classifies stakeholders based on multiple characteristics, such as the ability to impose their will, power, the urgency of their needs, expectations, or requirements, and the legitimacy of their involvement. One main purpose of stakeholder analysis and presentation models is to prioritize stakeholders. For example, you can draw a variable against another variable and see where the stakeholders fit in that plot. If the variables are chosen carefully, the plot will suggest how much attention should be given to various stakeholders in the plot. As an example, Figure 3.2 presents such a plot in which the x-axis represents the level of interest from very low to very high, and the y-axis represents the power, i.e., authority, level from very low to very high. Stakeholders 1, 2, and 3 have a low interest in the project and low power, and therefore they do not deserve much of your time and effort. However, they must be monitored because their interest and power may change over time. At the other extreme, stakeholders 8, 9, and 10 have a high interest in the project and have a very high capability to influence the project due to high power. These stakeholders should obviously be managed with maximum effort. Also, the high authority/low interest stakeholders should get due attention because they have the power to drive a change in the project. Caution! The communication of information about stakeholders is an important part of the stakeholder management strategy. For example, some of the information about certain stakeholders may be too sensitive to be included in a publicly shared document. As a project manager, you must exercise your discrete judgment on which information about which stakeholders to share with whom and to what detail. The results of the information from stakeholder analysis and data presentation go into the stakeholder register, the main output of this process. Output of identifying stakeholders. You store information about the stakeholders that you identified in a document called the stakeholder register. This information includes the following items. Identification, for example, name, location, organizational position, project role, if any, and contact information, figure 3-2. An example of determining strategy by plotting stakeholders against different variables. Assessment, requirements and expectations coming from the stakeholder, the part or phase of the project that is of most interest to this stakeholder, and an assessment of their potential influence and impact on the project. Classification, there will be a whole array of different kinds of project stakeholders with varied influence. So, it's helpful to classify them in a register by using suitable criteria, such as whether they are internal or external to the performing organization, whether they are proponents or opponents of the project, their power, influence, impact, and interest levels, the direction of their influence, etc. In addition to this output, the Identify Stakeholders process may also generate change requests, and as a result some documents may need to be updated, such as those listed in the output column of Table 3.2. Study Checkpoint 3.2. Knowing the Identify Stakeholders process, answer the following. Q1. Describe which EEFs can influence the process of Identify Stakeholders. Q2. Describe which OPAs can influence the process of Identify Stakeholders. Congratulations! Now you know the project stakeholders. But, before you can manage them, you need to plan. As pointed out earlier, managing stakeholders is all about stakeholders' engagement in the project. So, we want to plan stakeholder engagement. You will learn how to do this in the next part of this book. Study Checkpoint 3.3. Q1. What is the first process you perform in managing a project? Q2. What do you need before you can begin initiating your project? Welcome aboard. As we have seen in this chapter, the project charter is a document that states the initial requirements to satisfy the stakeholders' needs and expectations, and it also formally authorizes the project. The single most important task for the develop project charter process, the standard process used to develop the project charter, is to authorize the project. To accomplish that, it is necessary to document the business needs and the new product or service that the project will launch to satisfy those needs. This way, the project charter links the proposed project to the ongoing work in the organization. In other words, the project charter provides the interface between the project and the organization's strategic objectives. This clears the way to authorize the project. The project charter is approved by an appropriate person in the performing organization. Who this person is depends on the organization and the project. This person, for example, could be the CEO of the company, the project sponsor, or a representative of the project selection committee. By default, it's the project sponsor. With this approval of the project charter, the project is officially authorized, the project manager is officially assigned, and the authority level of the project manager is determined. All this officially starts the project. Also note that in the whole process of initiating the project we have identified the high-level assumptions, constraints, and risks coming from the current environment, organizational factors, historical data, and expert judgment. We can use this information to initially propose an implementation strategy for the project. Note if a project includes multiple phases, the processes in the initiating process may be performed at the beginning of each phase, example, to validate the assumptions made during the previous phases. Study checkpoint 3.4. In the following table, match each item in the first column to one or more items in the second column to describe its role during project initiation. Item role. A. Business documents 1. Input to developing project charter. B. Project charter 2. Output of developing project charter. C. Procurement documents 3. Input to identifying stakeholders. D. Assumptions log 4. Output of identifying stakeholders. The four most important takeaways from this chapter are as follows. A project can originate inside the performing organization or outside of it in order to meet business requirements, take on an opportunity, offer a solution to a problem, etc. But the grand origin of a project is always the strategic plan of the organization. The develop project charter process is used to generate the project charter and assumptions log. The process of identifying the stakeholders generates a stakeholder register, which contains detailed information on project stakeholders. The project charter officially authorizes the project, names the project manager, and determines the authority level of the project manager. Summary of project initiation. Organizations start projects to fulfill different kinds of needs called initiation contexts, such as to meet a business or legal requirement, to take on a business opportunity, to develop a solution for a problem, or to develop a new product. However, the underlying motivation is always to meet some business objectives in the strategic plan of the organization. The context triggers the process of creating two project management business documents, 1. Project business case, and 2. Project benefit management plan. One of the purposes of project initiation is to align the project with the organization's strategic objectives, which is accomplished by 1. Generating a project charter based on the aforementioned two business documents, and 2. Aligning stakeholders' expectations to the project charter. This way, the project charter acts as the interface between the project and the organization's strategic objectives. The initiating project stage, also informally called the starting stage, is constituted by two processes: develop project charter and identify stakeholders. The three documents generated by the initiating stage are the project charter, which defines the project and names and authorizes the project manager, assumptions log, which contains information about the project assumptions and constraints, and the stakeholder register, which identifies the project stakeholders and relevant information about them. The project charter includes the project justification, a high-level project description, and high-level information, such as project scope, project objectives and success criteria, project objectives and success criteria, project requirements, and a risks and budget summary. Road ahead. After the project has been chartered and project stakeholders have been identified, it's time to plan the project. Project planning involves determining exactly what will be done and how it will be done. Executing a project means implementing the project management plan for that project. Therefore, the project management plan contains the project scope, which defines what needs to be done to meet the project objectives. But, how is the project management plan actually developed? In other words, issuing an approved project charter moves the project from the initiation stage into the planning stage, which is composed of a number of processes collectively called the planning process group. These processes will be explored in the next part of the book. Exams I view. Comprehend. Project charter provides the interface between the project and the organization's strategic objectives. The project charter, which is an output of the develop project charter process, is an input to the identify stakeholders process. The develop project charter process needs to be performed at least once before the identify stakeholders process because the project charter is an input to identifying project stakeholders. Look out. A contract can be an input item to both the develop project charter process and the identify stakeholders process. Example, for identifying stakeholders, a contract could be a part of procurement documents. Two business documents, the business case and the benefit management plan, are input items to both the develop project charter process and the identify stakeholders process. The assumptions log is an output, in addition to the project charter, of the develop project charter process. Memorize. Project stakeholders are individuals and organizations whose interests are affected, positively or negatively, by the project's execution and completion. The project charter is the document that formally authorizes a project, which includes naming a project manager and the project manager's authority level. The project charter includes high-level information about the project, such as purpose and justification, project requirements, objectives and success criteria, milestone schedule, risks, and budget summary. The major output items of project initiating are project charter, assumptions log, and stakeholder register. Review questions. 1. Which of the following issues the project charter document? A. The performing organization's higher management. B. Any stakeholder. C. The customer. D. The project manager. 2. What document is the result of the integration management process in the project initiation process group? A. Business case. B. Project charter. C. Project benefit management plan. D. Preliminary scope statement. 3. The project charter is important for which of the following reasons? A. It authorizes the sponsor. B. It names the project manager and authorizes the project manager to use the organization's resources for the project. C. It identifies all the stakeholders. D. It analyzes the stakeholders. 4. Which of the following is not included in the project charter? A. High-level risks. B. High-level product requirements. C. Budget summary. D. Project schedule. 5. You have been named the project manager for a project in your company codenamed Kill the Bill. The project must be completed before Thanksgiving Day this year. This represents which of the following project characteristics? A. Assumption. B. Constraint. C. Schedule. D. Risk. 6. Which of the following is true about assumptions in the project initiation? A. Because assumptions are a part of the project charter that you did not write, you don't need to validate them. Just assume the assumptions are true, and if the project fails, it's not your fault. B. Because assumptions represent risk, you must validate them at various stages of the project. C. An assumption is a condition that has been verified to be true, so you don't need to validate it. D. You must not start a project until all the assumptions have been proven to be true. 7. Which of the following stakeholders can authorize the closure of a project? A. Project manager. B. Customer. C. Project sponsor. D. Functional manager. 8. A data presentation model that presents a stakeholder's influence, impact, and interest in one plot is called A salience model. B. Stakeholder cube. C. Influence/impact/interest grid. D. Three-dimensional model. 9. You are the project manager of a project named Teach the Congress. Your friend Cosmo is a project manager of a project that shares some resources with your project. What kind of influence does Cosmo have on project Teach the Congress? A. Upward. B. Outward. C. Sideward. D. Downward. 10. What document is not the result of the project initiation process group? A. Statement of work. B. Project charter. C. Stakeholder register. D. Assumption log. 11. The project charter is important for which of the following reasons? A. It authorizes the sponsor. B. It names the project manager and provides the ECT manager with the authority to use organizational resources to run the project. C. It interfaces between the project and the organization's strategic objectives. D. It identifies all the stakeholders. 12. Which of the following is not an input to identifying stakeholders? A. Stakeholder register template. B. Contract. C. Stakeholder register. D. Business case. 13. Which of the following lists the documents in the order their first drafts are written? A. Benefit Management Plan, Project Charter, Stakeholder Register. B. Project Charter, Benefit Management Plan, Stakeholder Register. C. Stakeholder Register, Project Charter, Benefit Management Plan. D. Benefit Management Plan, Stakeholder Register, Project Charter.